Happy Thursday, everybody. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Andrew Ellis. This is Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast brought to you by The Podcast. We are going to talk about a lot of Ohio State stuff tonight, but we're going to, before we look ahead, Andrew, take a little look back. And it's already been a pretty productive week for Ohio State. It started Monday morning with a wide receiver commitment. And then on Wednesday, we have a commitment from Leroy Roker, commitment number 22 in the class of 2024. Florida, 3-star wide receiver or safety. Sorry about that. We already talked about it a little bit on the commitment analysis that we did on Wednesday, but I think it's worth just reiterating here that the addition of Leroy Roker does not mean Ohio State is done at safety in the class of 2024. I keep wanting to say 2022 because it's the 22nd commit.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I mean, we talked about him the other day, but just rangy, covers a lot of ground. He just kind of fits what they needed in that backfield, even if he doesn't have 5 little stars next to his name. So that's really my biggest takeaway with that one.
Yeah, it's one of those funny things where I'm thinking, I don't know, earlier today I was watching a podcast and there was a lot of conversation about Dallin Hayden on it, right? And Dallin Hayden, when he was recruited in the class of 2022, he was a 4-star player. But not a guy that a lot of Ohio State fans were like, we love this guy. This is our favorite guy. We have to have him. And this is not apples to apples, and I get it. But now, because Dallin played a little bit more than everyone expected in 2022 in the season and was better than people thought, now there's a lot of people who are like, why isn't he playing? Why isn't he playing? Why isn't he playing? And, I think it's just a reminder that recruiting rankings are subjective, and most of the time they're pretty good. I mean, I don't think that this industry would be what it is if the recruiting rankings weren't generally predictive of what things are going to be for players, but it's not the be-all, end-all when you get players who play in unique areas like Dallin Hayden in Memphis or Leroy Roker in Fort Myers. It's not always the same caliber of competition. You don't always get an opportunity to see guys. Leroy Roker had just recently transferred high schools, and so he's a new guy at his high school, and where he was before really didn't have a program that got him any attention, and now he has that opportunity, and all of a sudden he gets an offer from Ohio State, from Iowa, from Minnesota, and he's worth people knowing. It's unfortunate because I think if this was June and he got the Ohio State offer in June, you'd see him picking up a lot of offers around the country, and all of a sudden his national ranking would go up and people would be excited about this. But it's a situation where the Buckeyes need depth at safety, as we talked about in depth on the commitment analysis. And again, more than that, it doesn't mean they're done at safety in 2024 with Jalen McLean, who's more of an in-the-box Lathan Ransom type. You add a player like this in Roker, who is a more of a deep safety, a free safety type, and then you still have a search for someone else to fit maybe that nickel type safety, that slot safety, which is probably more someone like Ryan Nichols, which fits the Nichols spot in the secondary.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean Ryan Nichols is coming to Ohio State. I don't get the personal feeling that he's all that interested at this point. Do you?
I mean, I don't hear much about him besides when we talk about him every week on here, really. There just doesn't seem to be a lot going on. I don't know if that's his doing or if that's Ohio State's doing, or maybe a little bit of both. I mean, we'll see if he makes a visit here in the next month or so, but if not, then he's going to sign with Kentucky and that'll be that.
Yeah. I kind of have this weird feeling he'll just show up at one of these next 3 home games randomly without telling anybody. And then it'll be oh crap, there's Ryan Nichols walking down the tunnel. And now we have to talk about it. I know for a fact the kid certainly isn't out there pumping his chest up and saying, hey, talk to me, talk about me, etc. But if you're from Ohio, your teammate is Chris Henry Jr. There's a lot of buzz around Ohio State. Buckeyes are definitely still recruiting him. I think it's also worth mentioning that his athleticism is what separates him, I think, in the eyes of Ohio State from a guy like Reggie Powers, who would seemingly fit that same type of role because of his body type, but the Buckeyes see Reggie Powers more as the Jalen McLean comparison. So it's just weird because they play so many different safeties and they're all different body styles and different types, and you can pretty much make up any excuse you want for why things aren't working or why they're not interested in one certain player. A lot of questions still this week about Coy Beasley, who's committed to Purdue, and why not go after Coy Beasley? And you say, well, he's 5'9", and they're not interested in that, and people don't like to hear it, but that's what it is. Hey, Sue, welcome. Mecca Hannah, welcome. we're just talking stuff already. Leroy Roker is in commitment number 22. I also think, Andrew, I believe firmly that Ohio State is willing and interested and likely to look for another safety in high school and then find one in the transfer portal to make more of an immediate splash next year. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting.
No, I mean, that makes sense. There's not a lot of names out there right now. Obviously, they just added one, but I think if you're an Ohio State fan, which obviously you are if you're listening to this, but the Caleb Downs starting at Alabama this year, like KJ Bolden starting at Florida State probably next year, like those are not normal situations. So don't view any of these guys Ohio State's going to land at safety in that same light, and view them as a guy who's going to contribute here in 2-3 years. And then you'll feel a lot better if you view it that way, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate because I do understand from a Ohio State fan perspective that the belief is that Ohio State should get the 5-star players at every position. They're all right. Every player they recruit should be a 5-star. They should land every single one of them. That's just not real life. Especially because, as we talked about at length on this show last week, like there are so few safeties in the country that are at that level, and there are so few schools around the country that recruit position by position the way Ohio State does, that it is a absolute fight for those guys. But a player like Leroy Roker, like I really think people should be excited about any player who picks Ohio State in this era, because there are so many things and so many so many things pulling at each kid, and so many reasons you could go somewhere else. And anytime a kid who was offered by Ohio State 2 weeks ago immediately turns around and makes an official visit and then gets home and says, I'm a Buckeye, like within a 10-day window, like that's pretty awesome. And I think that should be celebrated by people who, purportedly love Ohio State, right?
Yeah, right. And if he visited last weekend and the staff didn't get a good vibe or didn't view him as a kid that they wanted, then I doubt the news from yesterday would have come out and something different would have happened. Maybe he would be visiting Miami this weekend or something instead. But clearly there was a fit culturally or whatever, and that's never a bad thing. And going back to what you said about the transfer portal too, like, I mean, if they get a guy in the portal, who even knows if that guy is going to be somebody that makes an instant impact? I mean, Tanner McAllister played a lot. I thought Jihad Carter was going to be penciled into a starting spot this year, and now he's waiting his turn as well. So it's just, I mean, who the hell knows?
Yeah, I think it speaks to just what Ohio State is. I mean, there is no guarantee at Ohio State. It doesn't matter if you're a 5-star recruit. It doesn't matter if you're a high value transfer addition like Jihad Carter was. I know Jihad Carter was a big time pickup for Ohio State, a player they really, really wanted. But guys still have to get to Ohio State and fit into what Ohio State is doing. And we can nitpick whether or not Ohio State maybe needs to do something different. I suppose that's another conversation. But bottom line, you need program players also. You need guys who are maybe a touch developmental, because you can't have everyone in your program leaving after 3 years. It's just not a sustainable plan. But in conversations with Roker and conversations about Roker, like this kid is a perfect fit for Ohio State. They love the basketball background. I mentioned on the commitment analysis that there's a feeling that he's a little bit of a poor man's Malik Hooker. And when I say that, it just means that there's a lot of the same story. Maybe not quite as twitched up as an athlete, but a player that has a really high upside in Ohio State's mind, which is why they said yes to him after 10 days of recruiting him. And again, Iowa was very upset about this because they believed they had found a diamond in the rough. And as we've talked about on this show and others, when Iowa wants a defensive player, I think it's a good sign, because they are among the best in the country at recruiting and developing and evaluating defensive talent. So that's pretty good. You know what Brian Hartline's really good at doing? Evaluating and recruiting wide receiver talent. And that's why Javen Boggs from Cocoa, Florida, committed to Ohio State on Monday morning. Javen is originally from Dayton. He moved to Florida when he was like 6 years old. So, I felt it already on Friday, the minute that he committed. All the questions. Oh, great. How long do we have to wait to see if we can hold on to this one? Like, it's not the same type of vibe. This is a kid from Ohio, family still in Ohio. His grandma lives in Dayton. Like, this is a kid that this is a going home type moment for him. And a player that camped at Ohio State, camped in front of Brian Hartline in June and wowed the Buckeyes. They offered him then. They wanted to see a couple games of his junior season. His second game of the year was against Charles Lester. And he had 210 yards and 3 touchdowns against Charles Lester, the 5-star commitment for Florida State. Like, that's the moment when you're like, okay, we're good here. We've seen what we want to see. if you watch the film, Andrew, he looks and runs a lot like Jackson Smith-Njigba.
Yeah, that's the first thing I saw when I watched his tape. Good player, really good player. You said that the Roker news was a unfortunate bit of news for Iowa. This one here is an unfortunate bit of news for Florida because, he was seemingly a top priority for them. So big win for Brian Hartline. He just keeps getting win after win. You mentioned the question about the proximity to home and will they keep him? And I didn't know about the Ohio roots, so that makes you feel better about it. The other question I saw after the commitment was, can he play offensive tackle, which I don't think that's going to happen. But Brian Hartline continues to get whoever he wants, basically, at least.
So, it seems unlikely. It seems unlikely that this 6'1", 185-pound receiver will develop into an offensive lineman. But in the world of science today, there's no such thing as modern marvels or miracles. So with Boggs, again, I don't want to put that sort of expectation on him. It does feel a lot like Jackson Smith-Njigba. Jackson, when he committed to Ohio State, it was November of 2018, and he was a 3-star prospect in Texas, came up for one Ohio State visit in November, called me and told me he had committed to Ohio State before he even went home from that trip. Nobody else at that point was really recruiting him on the national scale. There was a lot of conversation amongst people in Texas that Ohio State found a diamond in the rough, and they were like, this kid is the best receiver in Texas. I've seen a lot of similar conversations from Floridians in the last couple weeks about Javen Boggs and how if Jeremiah Smith weren't in Florida, that Javen Boggs would be the best receiver in the state. That is the kind of thing that Brian Hartline does better than anybody. He has not. It's funny because he only recruits what seems to be 5-star receivers, but he does not care about stars at all. He's looking for the guys that he wants and that fits what he's looking for. And then those guys just happen to end up being 5-stars.
Yeah, and then you've got Chris Henry Jr. already in the fold for 2026. So, I mean, that's just terrifying to even think about. But, yeah, I mean, he's the best recruiter in the country, bar none. And it's really fun to watch what he's doing right now.
I had Javen Boggs on Birminology, and that's on the podcast feed on Wednesday morning. And I was doing a little research for that show, which I almost never do because I like to just, go off the cuff in everything we do. But I was sitting reading, and I was looking up Javen Boggs 247, Javen Boggs rivals, Javen Boggs on 3, just reading all the different articles. And there was a story that I wrote about him in June when he made his made his camp visit. And he told me then Ohio State's his leader. He told pretty much every Ohio State recruiting writer that was around the Ohio State's his leader. And then nobody talked about him again until this week, really, because he hadn't visited. I've kept up with him because I've been maintaining his rivals profile and stuff like that. So I've been able to keep up with him a little bit, checking in. Hey, how are things going? You still feel, can you add this off for sure? Ohio State's still my favorite. And then I realized as I read all these these stories, 30 in a row were from Florida writers. And I was like, holy crap. I had no idea that they were so personally invested in his recruitment, but it seemed to be one that they really believed was going to be over multiple times in the Gators direction. But he never once said anything different than Ohio State's my favorite. So I guess it's the funny thing about recruiting is that you can sort of make yourself believe anything you want to. But sometimes the kids are just telling you the truth. So.
Yeah, everything I had read from the Florida side made it sound like he was close to committing to them, but unfortunately, Brian Hartline is not at Florida. So,
yeah, I mean, the reality is, and Javen Boggs told me multiple times, it's Brian Hartline, and this is the allure of Ohio State right now for the receivers. And there are a number of Ohio State fans who I hear from regularly that, oh, great, another receiver. Oh no, I mean, you just got to take the best players at every position. Brian Hartline has just made it very, very easy for the best receivers in the country to say yes to Ohio State. If you look at other positions, and I know offensive tackle is the one we're going to keep going to, you need to have more production like Ohio State had in the last year to get these kids around the country to buy in, and that's the simple facts. We look at Paris Johnson, but he's a generational talent. You look at DeJuan Jones, and he is a mutant of a human being. He's not a normal offensive lineman. He is a mountain of a person. So you have those guys, and you did a good job developing those guys and getting them ready for the NFL. But then you look at this season, and if you're an offensive tackle, you might have questions about whether or not Ohio State is the right spot for that. Now, that's up to Justin Fry and the Buckeyes to figure out how to combat it. But the reality is, to me, Andrew, this is a conversation that Maryland recruiting boards and recruiting administrators and recruiting employees started to have about Larry Johnson a few years ago, right? Like, if you can only develop 5 stars, are you developing guys well? And so it's up to Ohio State to prove that that's not the case. Brian Hartline has done that with Chris Olaves of the world, with what we're seeing right now out of just guys like Xavier Johnson, who are developing into NFL type players, even though he was a walk-on. So like, you have to develop the 5 stars, but you also have to show the ability to develop everyone else. And it's easy for me to understand why sometimes national tackles aren't seeing that at Ohio State, because you went from Taylor Decker to Paris Johnson without having a offensive tackle picked in the first round. Like, that's not great, right? Like, the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, exactly. And you see all these Alabama tackles going in the first round too. So it's tough to overcome. Again, I was hoping this recent NFL draft can give them a little bit of a boost, but there's still time. So we'll see. Hopefully they can get the one big fish they got out there still.
Yeah. And that's why it's worth running down the class of 2024 again and so seeing where things are, position by position. We can do that. We're not trying to take this show 2 hours long. There's a lot of football on tonight. People want to watch it. Quarterback, obviously they're done. Aaron Noland is in the class. He will be at Ohio State for sure on the Penn State weekend. 3 running backs, Jordan Lyle, Sam Williams-Dixon, who's an athlete and can play defensive back if needed. That may be your additional safety if you're actually looking down the road. Like, do they have one? Maybe they already have a third, because Sam Williams-Dixon does fit that profile of a slot safety. And then, of course, you have James Peoples out in San Antonio. He'll be in town for the Penn State game as well. Wide receivers. This is going to be the interesting conversation, I suppose. We'll talk about it more in the 4-minute offense at the end of this the show. But Jeremiah Smith, Jeremiah McClellan, Mylan Graham are 3 of the best in the country. All 3 of them are expected to be on campus next week for the Penn State game. Max LeBlanc and Demarion Witten will both be on campus for the Penn State game. All 3 offensive linemen, Ian Moore, the Armstrong twins, will be on campus for that game. Edric Houston was on campus last weekend for the Maryland game, is coming back for the Penn State game. I expect that we will see Justin Scott for the Penn State game. We will probably not see Eric Mensah again. He was there for the Maryland game after visiting earlier in the year. Peyton Pierce will be there. Garrett Stover will be there. Bryce West will be there. Aaron Scott will be there. Jalen McClain will not be there because he was just on campus this past weekend. And Leroy Roker will not be there. So I think 19 of the Ohio State 2024 commitments will be there. It's going to be a big weekend. But the question is, who's left, right? Who's going to be joining that group when they're visiting next weekend? And Amaris Williams, the Florida commitment, the defensive lineman, he's visiting, official visit for the Penn State game. The Buckeyes did offer another defensive end this weekend, and Andrew, too much to like, I imagine your satisfaction, it's a true edge defensive lineman, 6'6", 215, 220 pound, Deshaun Warner from Desert Edge High School in Goodyear, Arizona, the spring training home of the Cincinnati Reds. This is a player that has blown up. He's been committed to Kansas for a few months. Michigan offered him recently. Ohio State offered him recently. And now the question is, how soon can you get Deshaun Warner on campus?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about Larry Johnson's type being those 6'4", 270-ish guys, kind of like the Edric Houston molds. And this one is, like you said, more of that pure pass rushing defensive end type. So he's blown up a lot. I know some of the sites have updated their rankings lately, and he's kind of been skyrocketing up there. Also, an interesting kind of twist to this one is that he's a very high priority guy for Michigan too right now. Yeah. So I wonder, I mean, it sucks for Kansas, but this could turn into a good old fashioned Big Ten battle, and, getting him on campus certainly wouldn't be wouldn't hurt. So. Yeah.
And when you say Big Ten, like, you can also probably throw in USC. They do always very well in the Phoenix area. I'm sure they'll get involved here as well. This is a recruitment that feels like it's really just getting started, and as good as Lance Leopold has been at Kansas, it's probably going to end up out of their league. And that's maybe because I don't expect that Lance Leopold will be at Kansas that long anyway. So maybe this kid ends up following him to Michigan State or something like that if Leopold gets an opportunity to take that job. But Deshaun Warner is a very, very exciting player. I recommend putting on his highlight film and checking him out. I think he stacks up very favorably with Elijah Rushing, who's another big-time defensive end from Arizona who recently just decommitted from Arizona and will likely end up at Oregon. I think if you stack them up side by side, I would probably take Warner right now, and that's some sites have rushing as a 5-star player. So it's interesting, but it's also telling because Ohio State desperately needs an edge rusher in this class. I don't know who it's going to be. If it's not Warner, we'll see. There has already been some discussion about him maybe getting to campus this weekend or next weekend for the Penn State game. It's going to be difficult if it's not then. He's going to have to make a travel arrangement. Like he does not have a day off from his high school schedule. Arizona's playoffs begin, I think, the weekend of November the 4th, and Desert Edge is expected to make a pretty deep run in the playoffs. And so I don't know that he can get there for the November 11th game against Michigan State, although that one to me seems more likely because it's a night game. And so traveling from Arizona, maybe you can get out early enough on Saturday morning to make that happen. So I've seen some discussion that maybe he'll be in town for the Penn State game, but as somebody, do you know I used to live in Arizona?
I've heard rumors of that. Yeah.
So I used to live in Arizona, and I will tell you, getting a flight out late on Friday night it's feasible, but it's not ideal because you don't want to take an official visit and get into town at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning and just be wiped out. So let's not do that. Let's not do that, Andrew. You know what I mean?
Hey, let me ask real quick. Do you think if Mario Cristobal continues to make some of the worst coaching decisions in the history of coaching, like maybe Marquise Lightfoot's a name we will be talking about again at some point, or is that ship sailed?
I think it's sailed. I know that there's still conversation happening. I just don't see it happening. And if I have to eat crow on that, so be it. The kid was committed to Ohio State privately for a month and a half, changed his mind a couple, 48 hours before he announced it publicly. Miami he's been back down there. He's been, I don't know. I just don't see it. I would love to see it. I think Marquise Lightfoot is really good. But I just personally don't see it. And again, he said he's not going to, his high school does not really allow their committed players to make visits to other schools. So he'd have to decommit. And I mean, Mario Cristobal certainly is on the LOL list for what happened last week, but Miami is going to be a better program in these next couple of years. And I think that Cristobal and the way that they are able to capitalize on NIL and all that stuff, like, I think that they feel pretty confident that they're going to be in the right spot there. Jason Taylor is their defensive line coach, and like it's Jason Taylor, you know what I mean? Like, it's one of the best defensive linemen of all time. The opportunity to work with a guy like that and a young guy like that may be appealing to Lightfoot. It's not the same situation as trying to recruit Chance Robinson or something like that from the same area who's committed to Miami. Chance will not visit Ohio State for the Penn State game. He'll be in town for the Michigan State game. So that's a little change up from what we had been expecting. I'm still not really sure exactly where that goes. I don't think he makes that official visit to Ohio State unless he's planning on ending up in the Ohio State class. So maybe this extra 2 weeks that he'll have to consider everything, maybe that will end up with him deciding against the visit, but I would imagine he will still make that visit. And if he does, I think he flips to Ohio State. So then there's one in the class, and then there's Jordan Seaton, right? That's the one everyone wants to talk about. Jordan Seaton.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the mythical unicorn that they're trying to capture. So I mean, I know he's visited, but Florida State, I think he's supposed to be somewhere this weekend. Alabama's still viewed as a favorite. Tennessee gets mentioned more than Ohio State in the articles that I read. Not sure if that's got any truth to it, but I don't know. It's just one of those get him on campus things.
He just visited Tennessee, and so
that's right.
I mean, this is a kid who went to Florida, raving about Florida, went to Colorado and said that he saw things at Colorado he'd never seen before. I understand he's very, very savvy at playing this game. Ohio State believes still that they are going to get one of the last shots, one of the last swings here. I actually think, despite what we were just saying about the offensive tackle development, I think the fact that Ohio State did what it did with Paris Johnson and him getting in and out in 3 years and being a top 6 pick and, starting as a rookie in the NFL, playing fairly well for the Cardinals. Like, I think that will carry more weight for him than the conversation about Ohio State not developing tackles, because he sees himself in that mold and Ohio State sees him in that mold. And so it's easier to say to a guy, hey, if this is who you are, we'll get you there. And he really, really likes Justin Fry. So that's where things are. It's like, they know, and then we've talked about it every show, so I'm not even going to belabor the point, but like we know this is an NIL thing. And Ohio State needs to be as aggressive as they have been for any player at any point with Jordan Seed.
Yeah, pump up that NIL offer and show him the depth chart. That's exactly what I would do. But is it going to be enough? Who knows?
No one knows. No one knows. No one knows. Dan Hughes. I want to get excited about Devin Sanchez because I too very much like 6'2" corners, Andrew, but I fear it will be another Keon Keeley or Caleb Downs. How do you feel about that statement from Dan Hughes?
I mean, that's a fear for sure. That's a fear of mine as well, honestly. But I don't know. He wears Ohio State gloves. That's got to mean something, right? No, I'm just kidding.
It always means everything. I understand the fear. I also don't agree in this case. I think, again, means nothing. But if today was decision day, I feel like Devin Sanchez would pick Ohio State. And guess what? He's coming into town next week for the Ohio State-Penn State game, and it's going to be a whole lot of loving going on for Devin Sanchez at that time. And if Ohio State has a lead in his recruitment, as I believe they do, it will only grow next week. So
why do you feel that way? Is it just that Tim Walton has done a great job there, easy as that, or is there something else that I don't know about? Like he was born right outside of Columbus or something? Or
no, it's just there are times when you speak to kids or their families around the country, like you just get a feel that something is a little bit different. And the way that family talks about Ohio State, the way that he talks about Ohio State, I mean, I'm not into like social media clout chasing and all that stuff, but the kid has a countdown to his visit to Ohio State next weekend on his Instagram, right? Like that for a 5-star top 10 player in the country. Like generally speaking, those kids are too cool for school. You know what I mean? And he is not afraid to tell people, I really love what Ohio State's doing. And then you couple that with how the Ohio State corners have developed under Tim Walton in the last year. You couple that with the fact that there's going to be a fairly wide open opportunity at corner by the time he would arrive on campus. I just think it's a fit. And believe it or not, I think his friendship that he's going to develop with Dorian Brew over the next year and a half is going to help them both end up at Ohio State. And I think that's where it's at.
I will say you're very good at detecting the kids that are true Ohio State types. So myself and everybody listening to this will hold you to that one. So.
It's a real thing. It's not like a fake love for Ohio State. Mika Hanna says, I want Devin Sanchez, Dorian Brew, Trey McNutt, and Dwayne Galloway in the secondary. Why do you want Dwayne Galloway? Let me ask you that question. What do we know about Dwayne Galloway that says you should want him in the class? That's the question. Marion Franklin High School, Columbus, a lot of offers in the last couple of weeks. I saw him at Ohio State for the Maryland game. I do not believe he's 6'2", so I'll just throw that out there right now. I think he's probably under 6 foot tall. And again, that's what happens when you don't camp, I guess, and you don't get seen. People don't get the true measurement. Super fast. And I think the kid's tape is pretty good for what he's doing. But you have to see more to put him in a conversation with Ohio State offering. And I know people don't like that comment generally, but if Georgia said commit today, he could commit today, but Georgia would have no obligation to take him 18 months from now. So Ohio State would. And that's the bottom line. Tony Davenport Jr. means nothing at this juncture, Berm. I assume you're talking about the fact that Devin Sanchez may prefer Ohio State, and that's true. It doesn't mean anything at this juncture, but it'd still rather be in front than trailing. You know, that's the way I view it. But it does bring up an interesting question, Andrew, because we're talking about players like Devin Sanchez from Texas. We're talking about players like Dwayne Galloway from Ohio, 2 cornerbacks, both of them now ranked in the top whatever. One of them has 2 years worth of tape that's great and has showed up and camped everywhere around the country, and the other one hasn't. Ohio State, this conversation I think is interesting to me because we were talking about a little bit on the message board at ohiostate.rivals.com about running backs and why or why not Ohio State should just say, you know what, we're gonna take these 2 Ohio running backs in the class of 2025, and Marquise Davis is our guy, Bo Jackson is our other guy, and we're good there. We don't need to chase any big fish nationally. Do you think that that's the right approach?
I don't think that's the right approach, but I do think if you have a running back class with just Davis and Bo Jackson, then you're pretty much good as gold. They're always going to chase the national guys, the Jordan Davisons, guys like that. But if it ends up with a running back class, a 2-man class with those 2 guys from Ohio in it, I mean, celebrate.
Yeah, and I think that's the question, right? You got a guy like Jordan Davison out in California who I think is, bar none, the best running back in the country in the class of 2025, maybe the best high school running back in the country right now, regardless of class. Ohio State believes fully that it is in the conversation with him as the top 1 or 2 schools. Okay, the Buckeyes believe that, period. Jordan Davison has made no bones about that when he talks to the Ohio State staff. And anytime that there's a conversation, it goes, but we know this is going to be all about NIL, right? You have a guy 2 hours away in Northeast Ohio and Marquise Davis who is absolutely destroying people on the football field, just destroying people, and is a really good player. Is it worth just 2 really good players in the hand to say, you know what, we've got our guys from Ohio. We don't have to worry as much about NIL stuff. We don't have to worry about a guy maybe transferring as early in his career if he's not on the field. Where does the balance get struck? And is it position by position? Brian Hartline has no problem keeping his guys on campus. He has no problem getting his guys to take NIL opportunities that are worth less right now because he sees down the road. How do you see that, Andrew? Is it position by position? Is it player by player? Is it just Ohio State needs this position most in this class, so maybe it's easier to throw that concept away? How do you view it?
Well, you mentioned Ohio State feeling like they're in the top 2 for Davison, and I would remind everyone that Ohio State felt like they were in the top 2 for his teammate Brandon Baker, who just committed to Texas.
But they were not number 1, so it doesn't matter if you're in the top 2.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know, man. I feel like with the Ohio versus national efforts, with the staff Ohio State has now with Mark Pantoni and all the assistants and just everybody available, they can recruit a couple guys from Ohio with a level 10 intensity and recruit a couple guys from California with that same level, I guess. And I don't even really know if it matters by position as much. Brian Hartline's just in a whole category of his own. He can do whatever the hell he wants, but maybe offensive line, if there are guys in Ohio, and I know Landis mentions this all the time, if there's a fringe guy in Ohio, why not take that guy because of some of the luck you've had over the last few years getting burnt nationally? But other than that, I don't really see a difference.
I'm looking right now as I'm reading the state of Ohio top 10 for 2025. Tavian St. Clair, this is the 247 composite. So let's go down the composite. Trey McNutt at number 1, Ohio State's offered. Bo Jackson at number 2, Ohio State has offered. I'm telling you right now, Bo Jackson should not be number 2 on this list, but I don't get to do rankings. He's a good player, but he's not that high. Tavian St. Clair, number 3, has an Ohio State offer already committed. Number 4, Marquise Davis has an Ohio State offer. Number 5, Carter Lowe has an Ohio State offer. Number 6, Justin Hill has an Ohio State offer. Number 7, Luca Gilbert, Ohio State offer. Number 8, Ryan Montgomery, Ohio State offer. Number 9, Quentin Simmons does not. Number 10, Dante McClellan does not. Number 11, Dwayne Galloway does not. We go all the way down then to 14 for Brandon Caesar, who has an Ohio State offer. And you got to go down to, we don't even see in this top 26, Eli Lee is not even ranked in the composite in the top, but he has an Ohio State offer. It's pretty clear the Buckeyes understand that Ohio is going to be more valuable for them moving forward than it has been in the last decade because of NIL, is what I'm trying to get at. They are being way more aggressive in the state than ever before. And so I think it is telling for a player like Dwayne Galloway, for example, that while they are being more aggressive in the state, they are also being more committed to their evaluation process. They are not going to take a shortcut on a kid in Ohio and just take a flyer. We talked about this last week, so I don't want to beat the point up too much, but just because Georgia offered someone doesn't mean Ohio State's going to do it. So but it does show an understanding that the landscape is changing. And so if you have a player in the state like Eli Lee, for example, at 6'3", 220 pounds, runs a 4.6, does plays at a winning national contender type program like Akron Hoban, then why wait if you're going to have to come back on that kid later? Buckeyes are in on a lot of national linebackers in the class of 2025 already. Madden Faramo out in California, Elijah Melendez down in Florida, who's visiting this coming weekend. They could very easily offer Dante McClellan, who will likely end up at a Penn State or a Michigan or, maybe Ohio State. He could get that offer, but they haven't done that yet. So like, those are the questions where I think people are going to look back and say, hey, why didn't you how could you let that guy get out? How could you let that guy go? But like, if you want to win national championships, you have to recruit national.
Yeah, you're exactly right on that. Just out of curiosity, if you were the master of the rankings universe, who would you slide in there to number 2? I'm guessing Lower Davis, but
no, I would have Tavian St. Clair number 1, first and foremost. I would have Carter Lowe number 2. I would have Marquise Davis number 3. I would have Justin Hill number 4 and Trey McNutt number 5, probably. I think that those other guys like are physically so unique and so special that I think Trey McNutt is a really good player, but like he's somewhat limited size-wise at 5'11", 200 pounds. Like I think he's going to be a safety. He's listed at corner in a lot of places. I just don't see that happening. But either way, I mean, it's a pretty good group, and I could see a situation where Ohio State takes 11 or 12 guys in the class of 2025 from Ohio, and that's something that I just don't think people would have ever thought would happen again.
Yeah, that'd be something.
So I don't know. It's an interesting conversation. It's certainly something that Ohio State is cognizant of and is trying to do justice and do right by the kids in Ohio who have earned the offer. I think that if you look at the offensive line in 2024, and again, we talked about this last week, but when you took a flyer early in the process on Mark Nabe and then decided that he was not living up to that standard, it does make you wonder why a guy like William Satterwhite or someone, another player from Hoban, like didn't get that same sort of push. And we don't know all of the background of every kid. We don't know who's advising every kid, but like I said it in the summer, and I firmly believe it now still. If William Satterwhite would have camped at Ohio State in the summer, he probably would have gotten an offer, and we wouldn't have this conversation. But now he's committed to Tennessee, right? So, like, this is what it is. And some of these kids are getting bad advice. Some of these kids are being pumped up and promoted on social media, by a very vocal group of people that maybe aren't privy to the conversations or the information from the Ohio State side. And it's kind of weird, but can't please everyone, can you?
No,
unless you can.
That's true. She can.
She has a way. She has a song for everybody.
Did you see that she might be dating Travis Kelce?
I heard that. I did. I saw that. I also saw Travis Kelce on every single TV commercial that I've seen in the last 10 days, which is crazy to me. The amount of money that guy must be getting from TV commercials right now is insane. Hey, I started to watch a movie last night. That Nicolas Cage movie when he's Dracula, and he's got like, I don't know, why's the name escaping me? He's Dracula, and like his Dracula's guy, like his what I'm talking about?
Gone in 60 Seconds.
Yeah, that was the name. Yes.
No, I know what you're talking about, but
the car in Gone in 60 Seconds was named Dracula. That's right, I remember now. It was a really funny start to the movie. I fell asleep, and can you just look it up and tell me what it is, please?
Yeah, his best movie is Pig. I don't know if you ever watched that one or not.
I've never seen Pig. There's actually, I was interested in seeing this movie with Nicolas Cage as Dracula because he played a vampire in a movie like in the 80s called Vampire's Kiss, which is one of my favorite like old B movies of all time. So
is it Benfield?
Renfield, yeah.
Renfield, there you go. Renfield.
So anyway, we're moving on. Renfield, good start to it. I'm looking forward to finishing out. But if you haven't seen Vampire's Kiss, it's Nicolas Cage as a guy who thinks he's a vampire, but he's not. It is chef's kiss. Unbelievable Nicolas Cage. An unbelievable Nicolas Cage vehicle. Blake Woodby. He would be committing on Saturday to someone. And Andrew I don't have an exact time for that to happen yet. I haven't seen it, and he has not gotten back to me to tell me. But I still feel like this is Ohio State's to lose, and that is a feeling that's only stronger after he visited the Buckeyes last weekend.
Yeah, the only thing I've wondered about, and we talked about it the other week, is just playing time. He's missed some time this season. They like actually seeing those guys on the field. But I don't know if that's going to prevent something from happening on Saturday, which we both feel it's going to be Ohio State. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting conversation. He's he's listed at 5'11", 180. I think most of the time, as we were talking about a little bit earlier with Galloway, most of these high school measurements, unless they are verified, and I don't know if that is, most of the time it's like an inch taller than they should be, or an inch and a half. I don't know if Woodby is actually 5'11", 180. He might be closer to 5'9 and a half, 5'10", sort of different than what Ohio State has been looking for at cornerback lately. Very fast. Kid can move really, really well. He hasn't played a lot of football this year for St. Francis. He's been dinged up, and so I think that it's smart on his part to want to get into a class right now as early as he can. Ohio State, Oregon, obviously the local school, Penn State, Maryland, all these other ones are going to be involved. But the timing of this visit a week ago to Columbus, the timing of the commitment now, all things point to Ohio State on Saturday. So just count on getting some news there. Football Central asked that question, I don't know, 40 times. Will Ohio State land Blake Woodby? Very, very cool to spam the chat with that. Appreciate that so much. We're closing in on 41 minutes, 42 minutes. Andrew, let's just dive in to the 4-minute offense. Thoughts, questions, concerns. What is on your mind? Jeremiah Smith, now the number one player in the country, according to 247 Sports and their rankings. And I don't disagree. I've been saying that for about 5 months, that he is not just the best receiver in the country, but the best player in the country. He is now the number one player in the country, according to the composite rankings as well.
Yeah, let's get out the flipometer. That sounds better. If I were to look down the list of current commits to find a name that I was kind of wondering, kind of iffy about, we mentioned Ohio State still going after Robinson, the Miami commit. Jeremiah McClellan, is that would you say high alert, medium alert, small alert?
It feels like at least a little alert. He visited Oregon 2 weeks ago, visited Missouri last weekend. Missouri has Williams and Winari committed, the 5-star defensive end from Missouri. They now feel very confident that they're going to land Ryan Wingo, the 5-star wide receiver from Missouri. I think the belief in Missouri is that if they can pick up Ryan Wingo, that they will flip Jeremiah McClellan as well. I don't think that that's sure thing type of concern. He's expected at Ohio State for the Penn State game. He's expected at Ohio State for the Michigan State game as well. I would put – I'm reluctant to ever say never, but I'm going to put McClellan in the same conversation as Jeremiah Smith, which is what? What's the asterisk? What's the –
They will end up at Ohio State unless something happens with Brian Hartline.
That's about it. Maybe it's a little different in this case because there is such a push to stay home in Missouri. I've heard that Missouri is offering a lot of money to those 3 guys to stay in state and build their program, which is smart if you're allowed to do it. Plus, you're allowed to start collecting money now in Missouri because Missouri high school athletes are allowed to collect on NIL. Ohio, are you listening? At some point, the Buckeyes will need their home state to do the same thing. It's Robert Davis. What's the name of the running back from Cleveland Heights? That's Marquise Davis. Lavelle Cannon. Will we ever get a number 1 class? Probably not. I mean, let's just be honest. The Buckeyes will generally not recruit enough players, sign enough players to land a number 1 class when Georgia and Alabama and those schools will generally sign 30 and the Buckeyes will generally sign 24. Jeremiah McClellan, yes, there's a little bit of worry. Again, Missouri does feel confident that they can flip him, but I think that it is almost directly tied to what happens with Ryan Wingo. And Texas is still very heavily on Wingo. Colorado is involved. There's a lot of moving parts there, but they feel good about where they are now. That's different. If you're trying to steal a receiver from Brian Hartline in Ohio State, that is not easy to do. Next thought, question, concern, worry.
Did we ever get much of an update on Dominic Kirk's? Was it just this past weekend when he visited, or was that a while ago? I'm just trying to remember the time.
No, he visited this past weekend for the Maryland game. The Washington commitment, 6'4.5", 250. There was some conversation about like, hey, he's visiting. Is Ohio State can offer? He's been out for 4 of the 5 weeks this year with a leg injury. The Buckeyes just want to see him play. He didn't camp at Ohio State in the summer because I think he had an injury then. Then he missed most of the season already. They want to see what he can do. He moved up from Division III to Division II, and they want to see how he competes, and we just haven't had a chance to see it yet. I do think if that continues, the relationship is good, though. Like Larry Johnson and him have a good relationship and have been working on making sure that when he puts it all on tape and the Buckeyes see it, that if they decide to offer, they're only going to do that with the knowledge that he's, going to flip from Washington. Because they don't really recruit kids that are committed elsewhere in the state of Ohio unless they know they're going to commit.
Yeah, but still not the 6'5", 220-pound edge type that we're really looking for right now.
No, and that's why you see a guy like Deshaun Warner get that offer. But I do tell you, I would say, like, after seeing Kirk's on Saturday, he was not like that big-bodied 255 that looks like he's going to get to 260. I almost think he's a player that's probably playing too heavy right now and not the other way around. Like I think his frame, I think you could probably see him at like 235, 240. If he changed his body and got a little bit more muscled up, I think he would actually probably end up in that 255, 260 range down the road, which is much different than a player who's 6'4", 260 right now that's going to end up at 290.
Makes sense.
You know what I mean?
Do we any just commitment? I'm not going to do in or out because like the only real 2024 name I got for you is Jordan Seaton, and that's not fair to ask anybody right now.
Just NA, incomplete body of evidence there. So we'll see.
Is there anybody like we're really watching as far as commitment watch besides obviously would be on Saturday? I guess maybe a guy like Eli Lee could pop anytime.
There will be a Bermanology video with Eli Lee on the podcast on Friday morning or Friday afternoon. I think if people watch that, you will get the same sense that I got, which is this is a kid who is saying all the right things and wants to make sure that he doesn't react emotionally to what has been a life-changing opportunity in receiving a new Ohio State offer when he did. And I will say, if that kid's not committed by the end of October, I will be shocked. I don't want to say that I think Carter Lowe is on commitment watch because I don't know that he is. And he's pretty good about playing things close to the vest, but he's going to be back at Ohio State for the Penn State game. That'll be 3 visits in 5 weeks. Like, the relationship with Ohio State right now is light years better than he has anywhere else. And I really think that I know that there has been discussion between him and Tavian St. Clair about the value of being in Ohio and starting the class together. I'm not saying he's on commitment watch. I am saying it wouldn't shock me if his recruitment ended sooner than people thought or initially thought.
Well, I mean, given the tackle troubles they've had lately, if they miss out on the state's best for 2025, that would be that'd be quite a big miss. So
yeah, and I think that what you could see then is sort of a domino effect. If you do get Eli Lee and you do get Carter Lowe in this class by, let's say, middle of November, then you have the opportunity maybe with a Marquise Davis, with some of these other guys to really kind of push and say, hey, you guys need to be the nucleus. I think for Marquise, he's probably looking for that commitment from Ohio State to say, you are our running back in this class and we will build around you. And I think that as long as there's that big, elephant in the room of Jordan Davison out in California or Byron Lewis in Florida, like, I think that there's at least a part of Marquise that's probably saying, I need to see what they're doing here because, like, you don't know if someone else jumps into that class later. And I think they want to be the guy.
Who's the, like, early top competition for him? I know Notre Dame really likes him.
For Marquise Davis?
Yeah.
Okay. How do I say this in the right possible way? I don't think there is any early competition for him. I think it is a matter of him being totally cool with waiting to see what they decide to do. And I think I know he wants to be the man at running back in the class. and I don't think that he's going to want to be the second running back in that class or part of a two-man class. Now, that's a question that they'll have to answer with him as they move along. I think that there's other things that could happen at running back still. Even this is not me predicting anything, but like if you look, do you remember the class of 2023? It was a long time ago. Ohio State recruited two really good running backs from the South. They were both 5-star kids, and both of them signed with Alabama. Remember that?
Yep.
I don't know that either Richard Young or Justice Haynes are getting a lot of opportunities at Alabama. Not to say they won't next year, but I do wonder if what happens. Let's say you're Ohio State and this season ends and Travion Henderson goes pro, Chip Trainum leaves, Mayan Williams leaves, Dallin Hayden and Evan Pryor. We don't know about Evan Pryor's future with the knee injury. We don't know if he's ever going to be really back to what he was himself. If Richard Young or Justice Haynes says, hey, I'm interested in transferring, doesn't that just change everything moving forward? So we just don't know how things go. And I think Marquise Davis is in no hurry to make a decision. And a lot of kids say it, but I believe it when he does. But I think the biggest reason he's not in a hurry is because he's looking ahead and saying, I have an opportunity here to sit back, wait, and see what happens.
Yeah, that makes sense. If he keeps rushing for 6 touchdowns a weekend, it's going to make things.
He's awesome. I watched him play 3 weeks ago against Menor, and Menor did a great job on him. I think he only had like 40 yards rushing, but he was probably the best defensive player on the field for Cleveland Heights because he's just a really, really good player. I love the fact that he was like the leader of their team. He was the first guy out. He was their heart and soul, and I love that. Jacob Langston, is Fahim Delane a serious possibility in the class of 2025? Yes, absolutely. He will visit Ohio State next week for the Penn State game as well. I think that you could potentially see a 2025 defensive back haul of Devin Sanchez, Dorian Brew, Trey McNutt, and Fahim Delane. And if you get that, that's as good as it could possibly get for Ohio State. And I think that's very, very real.
And Blake would be. Yeah.
So I think that's that group, like, I don't care who the fifth is if you get those 4. Like, that is a really solid group. And I don't know if Dorian Brew will be on campus next weekend. I haven't heard from him. But Fahim Delane and Devin Sanchez and Trey McNutt all will be. And I'm telling you, this next weekend for Ohio State is one of those weekends that will end up being like the nucleus of a class because all these kids are going to spend the entire weekend together, and that's massive, 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 massive.
Yeah, the visitor list is already intimidating, and who knows who just shows up randomly too. So it's going to be wild.
We never know. Look, we are at 52 minutes. Andrew, is there anything else on your list of thoughts, concerns, questions? I'm going to look here. Who is Dwayne Galloway? Marion Franklin Columbus, 5 foot, maybe 5'11". Hunter, I think I'm not trying to put the kid down. I'm just saying if your profiles list you at 6'2", 175, but you're really 5'11", 160, that's a problem. And teams are going to discover that when you make visits. So you need to just get the truth out there now so that you can get a better opportunity to be properly evaluated. Because the difference between a 6'2" corner who can run a 10-4 and a 5'11" corner who can run a 10-4 is pretty vast. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he's a good player. I like his film. I like what I've seen of him. I just think that maybe we need to pump the brakes there a little bit and let him actually develop the right way instead of just assuming that because Georgia or somebody offered when they don't have any obligation to actually take him means that Ohio State needs to be all in love with the guy. So that's just not the case yet. But they are interested. He was offered an opportunity to visit a week ago and did, and now the relationship can begin. But it's just beginning, so don't get too wrapped up in that. Is Deshaun Warner a realistic flip possibility? Steve Heyman. We talked about it a little bit. I'm not going to say he's a realistic anything until he visits, but we'll see if he's supposed to visit anytime soon, or if he's going to visit anytime soon. Some rumors it could happen for Penn State. Michigan State to me is more likely because it's a night game, and he's coming from Arizona, where I used to live. I don't know. It's going to be a good week. We're going to have Talking Stuff next Thursday. It will be a live show again. We're going to probably try to do that earlier in the night. There's going to be a lot to talk about when it comes to the Ohio State recruiting list for the Penn State game. We'll do our best to keep fully apprised of that over at ohiostate.rivals.com. And if you're on subtext, you can join us there. The number has been all over 1,000 different things. It's in the comments below this video. So join us there if you want. That's an easier way to maybe stay directly connected with us if you're not interested in the whole rivals.com experience. But we got normal things tomorrow, podcast daily, interview with Eli Lee on Bermanology, road breaks from West Lafayette with me in Austin or Indianapolis. We're not going all the way to West Lafayette. That's stupid because there's nowhere to stay there and it's terrible. And then everything else you come to expect on the podcast. For Andrew Ellis, I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This has been Talking Stuff, and we really do appreciate you watching. Thank you for doing so. Please leave a comment, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'll talk to you later.